guys, I'm Millabout, and today I'm going to be talking about how to write a song. I'm just going to give you my 5 top tips for how to write a song if you've never written one before. So, writing songs is something that's very personal, so I'm going to tell you what helped me when I first started writing songs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be exactly the right way for you. It's easy to be flexible and just find what works best for you. So my first tip for starting to write songs is that when I first started writing songs myself, I found it was much easier to start with lyrics, to have an idea and then sort of write a poem and then put that to music. So I personally found that easier because I used to write poetry before I started writing songs. If you're not someone who writes poetry, it might not be easier for you to do that, in which case you might want to improvise lyrics as you are writing. Now, my second tip is also to do with lyrics, and this is to do with rhyming. So there's sort of a tendency to think that you have to rhyme everything when you're writing lyrics, and I'd say that that's just not true. It really does depend on what sort of style of music you're going for, but I would recommend trying to forget about rhyming if you're not used to doing that. And if you are used to writing poetry or whatever and rhyming it, it's best to sort of try and write in rhyming couplets for a song. Because often if I'm doing poetry, I might write like a A-B rhyme scheme, or maybe a more complicated rhyme scheme than that. But if you're singing a song, each line is probably going to take you a lot longer to get through than it would be if you were speaking it, because you're going to be elongating certain words while you sing. So it's much easier for the listener to have rhyming couplets that happen, and also that way you can have some rhyming couplets and some that doesn't rhyme at all. Again, that makes your song more interesting to listen to. Okay, my number 3 tip is to write yourself a chord sequence of some sort, whether that's on piano or guitar or whatever instrument that you play, perhaps ukulele. I would suggest writing a chord sequence and then sort of improvising over it. So you might want to have 4 chords, you might only want to have 2, you could have as many as like 8, although I would recommend for starting, I would find probably around 4 chords. And these don't have to be actual chords. If you're putting your fingers on strings on the guitar and you're not sure what chord you're playing, that's also completely fine as long as it sounds nice. So yeah, I recommend not just doing like C, G, E minor, I would recommend like finding a more interesting chord just to make your music sound a bit more fun. But it's absolutely fine to just use, basic chords as well. An easy way to make things sound a bit more interesting if you're new to playing the guitar or the ukulele is just to miss out a finger. So, for example, you can make G into G6 by literally just taking your finger off that top E string, and that instantly sounds a bit more interesting. Although again, you don't have to do this. It really depends on what sort of music you were trying to write, how consonant you want it to sound. Consonant means all the notes are sort of within the scale that you're writing within, so it sounds harmonically comfortable. I don't often write like that very much because I write a lot of folky stuff and I often like it to have an uncomfortable feel, so I'm writing quite dissonantly a lot of the time. My number 4 trick to writing a good song is to have a repetitive sequence. So this could be a chorus, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a chorus. And also, if you're writing and you're not used to writing, a nice trick that makes things sort of sound comfortable to the listener is to have something like an ooh or an ah that you repeat, maybe at the end of a verse or as your chorus, just so you don't have to write more lyrics, but also, and this is quite an important thing, if you do like an ooh, an ah, or like a doobie doobie doo or whatever, audiences will be able to hear that and remember it. Audiences and listeners are not that great at remembering lyrics most of the time. Unless they're listening to your song loads and loads of times, they're going to forget a lot of them. So when you've got something without lyrics, that is quite easy for them to remember and it gets catchy. If you're not going to do that, I would recommend repeating the same tune with different words within your verse. So you might have, say you've got a 4-line verse, you might have the first 2 lines being the same tune, or maybe the first and the third lines are the same tune, and then your second and fourth lines have slight differences to each other and to the first and third lines, sorry. Something like that I would recommend, just a bit of repetition. You don't want it to be entirely repetitive, but repetition really makes your song stick in someone's mind and just, you know, generally be successful. Okay, and my number 5 tip is, if there is anything that you are thinking about a lot, write about it. Sometimes I write about things like, if I watch a film and it makes me very sad, I might write about the film or write about the concepts within it. I wrote a song very recently about a book that I'd read and it had affected me a lot. I'd cried like for a couple of hours after finishing it because it was just such a sad ending. So I'd recommend using inspiration from other forms of media, or if there's something going on in your personal life, you know, classics of things like breakups, that's also quite a good thing to get inspiration from to write. But if you're struggling with inspiration from either of those places, then it's absolutely fine to write nonsense. It does not matter. You can imagine a scenario. You could write actual nonsense words. It really depends on what sort of music you're trying to write. Personally, I think that lyrics are a very important part of songwriting, but if you are able to improvise something that sounds meaningful, it doesn't actually have to be meaningful. As long as your audience can glean some meaning from it, it doesn't actually have to be meaningful. And that's an important thing to remember. It just has to seem meaningful. And I think that this is a really controversial thing for me to say. Some people think that songs are not worth anything unless they actually are meaningful. But I disagree, because I think that it's more about the beauty of the writing than the actual meaning behind it, if that makes sense. If I'm writing something very, very beautiful and I've got a concept, perhaps, that it's supposed to mean, but I have no actual connection to that meaning myself, I've never experienced anything like that, I think that's just as worthy as someone who is writing about something very personal. I think that also writing about personal things is very worthy, and, you know, an example for me would be Fire and Rain by James Taylor, where he's writing about a friend of his who died, and his management team didn't tell him because he was recording an album at the time. He didn't find out till about 2 weeks after her funeral. And that's very affecting, and knowing the story behind that, I find that song very, very affecting. However, having heard that song not knowing the story, I still found it very affecting. So I think that meaning behind things is overrated sometimes, and that my top tip is not to worry about that and just to write what comes from your heart, whether it's true or not, and I'm sure that whatever you do will be great. Also, and this is my bonus number 6 tip, just try to be happy with whatever you create. Try and finish what you create. So whether you write a verse and a chorus and you think, wow, this is terrible, I hate this, just write another verse. Just write another verse, change the words, write that verse, sing it with verse, chorus, finish it off. Maybe record a little voice memo or a little video of you playing it, and then forget about it if you don't like it. Just make sure that you have finished it, so that when you go on to the next thing, you're able to finish a song. It's really important to be able to finish your songs, and if you don't like them, that's okay, but also remember that you tried your best at the time, and perfection within creativity is very, very difficult, and it's much better to just sort of go, well, I'm quite happy that I made something, than to go, oh, I really hate what I made. Because you're going to be happier when you make the next thing. So yeah, that's probably the most important things in songwriting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!